When I first joined PEN, the meetings were held usually in the grungy, badly lit room that was the PEN office in those days. It could just barely accommodate the 15 or 20 writers, poets, and editors who showed up for a meeting. Later, our homelessness was emphasized as the board rented space in the Sal Magundi Club on Lower Fifth Avenue. But with the growing urgency of PEN's mission, the numbers of writers in trouble all over the world increasing exponentially, and a disdain for the idea of literary life and independent witness seemingly pandemic, it was clear that PEN, if it was to function effectively, needed a major infusion of money. So we had a meeting, and someone pointed out that in most organizations, the financial burden was carried by its board. Whereupon Bud Trillin, in a state of panic that I have never seen repeated in this calmest and most imperturbable of men, leapt to his feet and shouted, "We're not that kind of board." As indeed we weren't. It was Norman Mailer, yes, Norman Mailer, who in the mid-'80s as PEN president revved things up and brought into our organization elements of the enlightened wealth of our city that resulted in today's managing partnership of writers and non-writers. The freedom to write and the flourishing of unaffiliated witness, not just a vocational interest, but an absolute necessity for us all, there being no hope for life in the body of any society without the circulation of ideas, without a culture of unconstrained self-expression, uttered in freedom, and in the face of outraged proprieties of whatever kind. We can have global swine flu in one season, or global economic slumps in another, but the global working over of writers and the strangulation of free expression is for all seasons. It is constant and unremitting. Writers are imprisoned and murdered, whether in countries of the right or in countries of the left, and even sometimes here, the strangulation finds its form as school libraries ban books that have offended someone's sensibilities, as textbook publishers eliminate from their texts scientific facts that are deemed unpalatable by religious zealots, and as our federal government would assume the right to know from library records what we're reading. So, when we stand against the suppression of writers in China, or Uzbekistan, in Serbia, or Egypt, or Vietnam, or Zimbabwe, we're defending ourselves, because this is a disease that is catching. And just as torture as a government policy is catching, just as the secret reading of emails and illegal tapping of telephones is catching, just as dismissing international treaties with contempt is catching. It is why I said, and Ron Marshall just quoted, that to write about the past is to write about the present. I believe that were I to write a novel about Galileo, when the Inquisition arrested him and forced him to recant his heretical view that the Earth was in orbit around the sun, I would be writing about the present. We can understand why an authoritarian government would feel threatened by the investigative reporting of a journalist, but it is perhaps more mysterious why verses of a poet or the stories of a novelist would require retribution, until we remind ourselves of the feelings that can be released in a human breast by an image, or the self-knowledge in the manner of a revelation that can rise from a story. In a theocratic society, such as that favored by the Taliban, God has done all the writing that is necessary, and a literary practitioner is most likely a blasphemer. In a secular dictatorship, the ruler understands that literature is the other profession that knows reality is amenable to any construction placed upon it. I do thank PEN and Borders for this Literary Service Award. Of course, performing a literary service, making something of redeeming social value, is or should be the last thing on a writer's mind as he or she writes. It's better to feel an overriding occupational desperation for having gotten oneself into a book and living in the lines with no way out except through the last sentence. And finally, I remind us all, perhaps belatedly at this point of the festivities, to wash our hands several times a day and not kiss one another's cheek. Thank you very much.